So this is the doll I used to make the dress. As you can see, her torso has a lovely narrow waist. Can you see that? A lot of dolls tend to go straight up and down, or they go down and then they have their ball joints for their legs. I tried to choose one that had a nice shape that actually, you know, went in nicely, but not unreasonably so. And she's quite in proportion. So that's what I kept in mind. I only got this from I got it from a place called Sam's Warehouse. It's like a $2 shop. I think she was called like a Mycene or something like that. I did chop all her hair off, which is probably something I wanted to do as a child, but never did, but I got to do it now. The reason I cut all her hair off was so it didn't get in the way. I also removed her arms so that I could get under them and nothing was in the way. I did leave her legs on, and all I've got is I've got a glass here with a toilet roll, and I stick her in there and she will balance lovely, and I'll be able to just turn her around as I work on her, and she'll be able to dry there as well. So that's my lovely model for this. The next thing you'll need is some clear cling wrap or cling film, or I'm not quite sure what people call it in different countries, but it's just, you know, this stuff you can wrap your sandwiches and things like that, and it'll cover your food in the fridge. This is all you need, and this is just to so that the paper mache isn't going to stick to our doll. So fold it in half, just grab your doll and wrap it nicely. So just give it a good press. Make sure it comes down over her hips. If you find that it's come up a bit, just add a little bit more of the cling film, because I'm not quite sure how long I want the torso on my dress, and it's better to have a bit too much of this and cut it off rather than not enough and it stick to my model. Okay, so just smooth it around. You want to make sure, see like here, see how it's sitting up? You actually want to make sure it goes in there. So I'm just going to loosen that and push it in more. Now this will stick better once you start paper macheing it as well. So, but just, you know, I'm not sure if you can see how that's actually, it's going in there now rather than straight across. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, my beautiful doll is wrapped in her cling wrap and back in her little container. Next thing you want to have is some book paper. I'm using book paper rather than newspaper because I hate getting the black newspaper print all over everything. It just annoys me. I've got some fairly small pieces here, as you can see, because I find the small pieces are very easy to work with when you're trying to get something around a shape. But I also have a few longer pieces for the first coat of the paper mache. I have my glue. Now this is just some PVA wood glue I've got. I only had a little left in the bottom, so I've added a bit of water to it, given it a great shake, and I have my old paintbrush. Try and use an old one here, and that's basically all we need to start with. Now all we're going to do is start paper macheing. Start off, you might want to get long pieces and do around her body here. But what I do suggest is when you come to the back of your doll, have I got a piece? Okay, here we go. When you come to the back, try and divide it, like having a piece there and just trying to find one here, and a piece like that, and just leave a little gap there so that when you cut it off the doll, you're not going to distort the shape of the dress in any way, because you're only actually going to be cutting through that that plastic wrap and not all the layers of paper mache, and it'll give you a nice little gap to play with for your lacing at the end. Okay, so I'll probably be fast forwarding through the next part of this, just so it doesn't get boring, and if there's anything I need to say, then I'll stop and say it. The first coat is always going to be the most difficult one to stick on, mainly because it has to stick to the plastic, but also because if you're using book paper, it can actually, it's thicker. It's much thicker than newspaper to start with, so it takes a lot more saturation of the paper. You may want to soak your paper perhaps in a bowl of glue if you prefer to do it that way. I actually just prefer to put it on piece by piece and mold it to the body as I go along. Before it's actually fully dry, you do something else just to mold it to the body properly, so it gets a nice shape. So if I can get a back piece and put it on now there. A longer piece for there. Use a longer piece for down the back, so it's not all, I mean, you can go over it with smaller pieces of course, but just for that main piece, try and, a longer piece might work a little bit better. Okay, just have to plug the camera in. All I've done is, as you can see, I've just left a little narrow gap down the back here. Crochet, I've just got to do around this area here now. And the best way to do around that area is to try and get little bits of paper that are kind of, shaped like the top of a bodice, or shaped similar to how you want the dress shaping, so there's not a lot of cutting involved, and also to use small pieces, because if you're going to be using things that are just too big, you're going to lose the entire shape that you're after. It's also a good idea to tap it down with your brush rather than drag it, because as when things are still wet, if you're dragging that brush like that, you see how the paper will move. So tapping it as you go is probably the best way I've found to do it. And see how that it kind of goes up and then down and up and then down. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. So it ends up with some sort of sweetheart look at the front of the dress eventually. I mean, you can always change that, of course. It's up to you. Okay, once you've got the torso entirely covered once, like that, and while she's still wet, just make sure you've got a good layer or so all the way around. See how it you know, if you were to drag, see how you would drag that down. Best to just tap them. Make sure they're nicely covered with glue. All over. And then the next step is, I'll just pop it back in there for a moment. A little bit of cheesecloth or gauze, something like that. This kind of thing. You don't want it to be too thick. This is actual cheesecloth. And I had a lot of trouble finding this kind of cheesecloth in Australia, and I ended up getting it from a kitchen store, getting the actual cloth they squeeze the cheese in. So if anybody is in Australia and is having trouble getting this kind of cheesecloth, that's where you get it from. And they give you, here it is, 2.5 square meters. Can't quite remember how much it was, $5 or $6 for that, but you know, you don't use huge amounts of this stuff. So okay, so once you have your cheesecloth, all you have to do is layer it around her torso like so. And the reason hang on, we'd probably be better off using the gap at the back there, but that, you know, you don't have to use the gap at the back there because this is so easy to cut through at the end anyway, that it's not going to be an issue if you cover the gap there. It's just the paper mache itself. It could be because I use the wood glue because I want a nice, you know, firm hard finish on it. I find it it's not always that easy to cut through at the end, especially if you don't want to lose the shape of your doll, of your dress. So you just put a light layer of the cheesecloth over there, and that just helps to keep, you know, everything where you want it to be, and also add a little bit of strength to it as well. And then we let this stage dry, and just before it's dry, you know, just press it into all her curves before it's completely dry, especially around this area here. You know, push it in nice and firm. You can't really do it now because it's sticky and you'll move things around, but just before it's completely dry, just mold it to her body shape, and you will get a much nicer look. Okay, and don't worry about trimming anything off just yet. Just yeah. So that's the first step in making our art dress. I hope that was easy for you to follow. And once this is dry, we'll go on to the next stage. Okay, I'm back, and she's pretty much dry now. Can you hear that? Took a little bit longer today because it's quite overcast and it's dark and dreary. If it was summertime, of course, they don't take quite as long to dry, and it's not like you can actually get the heat gun on them, because when you've got the plastic underneath, you don't want that to start melting onto the doll. So I ended up putting her underneath my clothes dryer, and the warm air was coming down, and it helped her to dry a little bit quicker than normal. Otherwise I would have probably had to leave it overnight because it's winter here today. That's right. So okay, as you can see around here, I've just molded it. Before it was completely dry, I just ran my pinky finger in there, just as you can see how you get those little that indent, and just have a visual, because you don't want that part of the doll looking weird. You want it to have a nice shape, see? So you just take it from every angle, and you can see here I just had to bend that down a little bit before it was completely dry, just to give it a nice shape there, and a little bit on this side too, see? And what I'll do, that'll just get covered with the next layer, and it should be fine. So that's her, that little strip down the back there. And we're going to get onto the second layer, and the second layer is pretty much exactly the same as the first layer, except, as you can see, this is just like a, you know, we've stuck paper everywhere in any direction and things like that. With the second layer, you might want it to be a little bit more pleasing to the eye. The newsprint or the paper print that you use, you might want it to see how we have a lot of white showing here. You just might have to give it a little bit more thought as to how the paper lies on the doll. Like you see, we have a lot of white area going on here. Now you could either use that to your advantage, or, you know, just take special care not to, like we have a big white space here too. If you want that, that's fine, but if you want it to look a little bit different, just give that a little bit of thought as you're putting the paper on, so that the end result turns out pleasing. You know, you could even use, like there's the edge of the page, you could even use the edge to make a pattern on her bodice if that's what you want to do. I'm not particularly going to do that on this one, but that is something you could do. You could perhaps rip the paper in a way that you get like a little bit of a white edge all along the top of her dress here, or you could have like a piece of white going down at an angle across her body, or even, you know, underneath here a strip of white of the paper here, just shaped up underneath her chest there, just to add a little bit of detail. I get, you know, you use your imagination and see what you come up with. But this is just the basics for making the actual art dress. So, okay, back to the glue and to the paper mache. And I'll probably fast forward it because it is pretty much a repeat of the first part, and then we'll, once that, I'll show you it once I finish putting the paper on, and show you what I do then. Also, try and resist the urge to have your pieces sectioned along the waistline. And what I mean is, try not to have pieces going just like that and finishing at the waist and then starting above. And because you end up with like a weak spot at the waistline, and you don't want that. You want it to be nice and strong. So try and have pieces that are, you know, covering that central part of the waist, and just mold it into the shape as best you can. Piece. And just try and follow the shape that you want. I mean, of course you can trim up once she's all dry. But if you're starting, you know, if you've got the basic shape as nice as possible, it's always easier to make it look nice at the end. And you'll know when she's all covered because you won't see any, see how you can still see a little bit of the cheesecloth underneath there. Of course, once she's all finished, you won't see any of the cheesecloth come through. So that's something else to keep your eye out for. And if you get her under the light, you can basically see if the cheesecloth is still visible there or not. It's just a little bit here that's annoying me. It's, if you can see, this is what I mean. If you you look at her from different angles, you'll know whether she's sort of the right shape or not. See, you want them to be the same there, don't you? But this one's just got a bit of a lump going on in the wrong spot. So I'm just going to use my finger. In fact, your fingers are great for this because you can sort of smooth things out much better than you can with the brush. But the brush is great for just getting them on there initially. Just of course I have the worst nails, so yeah, since I've been crafting they don't look good anymore. Yeah, see, you can get your finger into that waistline now and really see that how smooth that is now, and just use your finger to make her lovely. It'd be nice if we could do that to our own bodies, just smooth everything out. Now, as you can see that this side is right next to her little armhole there. But this side is slightly lower down. So when I trim her up, I'll just keep that in mind so I can trim this part a little bit lower down so that, you know, it doesn't look lopsided or anything like that. Make sure she's got a nice shape in her waist, because that's kind of what gives the whole thing a really nice look. If they've got a nice shape, see, you want it to look like a real little corset or body. Okay, I'm just going to go and get a wet one and clean my finger. Just a moment. Okay, a little bit less sticky, but still got a few bits there. But so now we have the second piece of cheesecloth. Now, if you don't want to do this step, you don't have to. I personally just like it, and I think it also helps to even out any little lumps and bumps. They don't look so obvious. If you wanted to use a fine lace on this part, you could. It's totally up to you. Because I like the paper showing through. I think that's the appeal of it myself. I hope it's going to go around her. That's okay, I can join a little piece on if it doesn't go around. So once again, it's to help add some strength to it, but it's just the look of it. I think it looks nice. So here we go, starting at the back. Just make sure you overlap the top a little bit so that it's covering it all, and just pat it on as you go around like so. And this does help that when you when you start just molding her a bit more, when she starts to dry, it just seems to hold everything in place nicely. And it tends to make its own little pattern too, which is quite nice as well. Ooh, we almost made it. I should have cut it a little bit bigger, but that's okay. Sticking to me. Right, let's have a look. So just, push it all in. Be nice to see it done with lace actually, now that I think about it. A nice pretty pattern. I'll have to try that. What I did here now was, while it's still wet, I get this, which is white fizz glitter, and it's ever so fine. Can you see that? It's very fine, and I use this a lot. There we go. How pretty is that? And what I'm going to do now is I've just got a bit of a rubbish bin there. Put her over the top. Just adjust that camera a little bit so you can see perhaps. There we go. Okay. Oh, I tend to start at the back where the seam is more than anything, so that I know where I've been. Just get a bit and sprinkle it over the doll while she's still, while the glue's still wet. Okay. And you don't need a lot of this, just for it to add a very pretty little poor doll, a very pretty sparkle. Give it a bit of a shake. And can you see that? Let's see if it will turn up. See how that just adds a very subtle little bit of glamour to her without it, you know, being over the top glittered. I hope you can see that. Yeah, you can see that. If I can see it, anyone can see it, because I don't have the best eyes. And I see a few little, you know, swirls here in the cheesecloth, but once it's almost dry, I will, you know, give that a bit of a press with my thumb in. Now, at the moment, if I press too hard, it's going to start sticking to me again. So now that's the second layer of paper mache. You know, but they're good thick layers. They're not just like one piece of paper and things like that. So I'm going to let that dry now. And because I have, you know, the top of the bodice is quite high up here, I've left myself enough room to shape the top of it if I want to. If you start that too low down, you don't leave yourself any room for correcting any errors or anything like that. She's very fairy-like now. Look at that, isn't it? There we go. We have a little forest fairy with her little wispy skirt on. Oh, that would be nice to make, wouldn't it? A little forest fairy. Okay, she's going to go dry now. That should take a while. I'll be back shortly. Alright, I'm back, and after this second one, she's nice and dry again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut it off the doll. And you just need to get a reasonably sharp pair of scissors for this. Remember where you've, see, that's actually very easy to cut because we've left a little gap. Although it may look covered, we know that it's not. Cut right through the plastic as well. Trying to keep it as straight as you can. Okay, there we go, see? And there. Very carefully take it off the doll, and as you can see I didn't quite cut all the plastic there, but that's okay. There's our doll. Put her to one side and actually peel all the plastic wrap off quite easily. There we go, there's all our plastic wrap off. And here, what you do, you end up with a little gap like that. What you do is just reshape it. And there is our little corset style bodice. Now I'm just going to trim this off because I don't want to keep that. Of course, if you wanted to keep that and do something along that line, that's quite alright. But I'm going to trim it off and generally tidy up the edges. You might like to leave it like that, but this particular dress, I want it nicely shaped. So let's see if I can film doing this without making any tragic errors. Try and keep the waistline together when you're doing this, and just because this side's a bit lower, I'm going to try and get the shape right on that side first, because I can always lower this side, but I can't make that one any higher. So I'm going to try and make this side like that side now. Now I want it to sort of, come down a little bit at the front there, like perhaps a ballerina dress would come down. So this, you have to sort of be a little bit careful, but because we kind of shaped that paper as we were paper macheing, you're not having to cut through huge amounts of paper mache. And see, that was just cutting, where is it? It's just a little tiny bit of gauze with the glue that was covering that little V. So we've got a basic shape there anyway, which that kind of makes it easier. Just adjust the camera a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Just got it against the dark background because it's just a little bit easier to see if I'm even. I was going to say you could put your holes in for the lacing now if you wanted to, rather than when you've got the full dress on, because it can actually, you know, get hard to hold once you start putting the dress on. So get a cork or something, and I think I learnt that off Linda, and put a cork behind where you're going to be starting to stick some holes in, because you don't want it going through your finger. Now if you've got a doll needle, by all means use a doll needle, but I've got this, it's like an awl, but it's a bit broken on the end, so it's got a very it's got a very like sharp bit where it's broken off, so it goes through things like this really easy. So just decide how many holes you might want, like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 holes. So I've got one there, don't do them too close to the edge either. Make sure it goes all the way in through the paper mache, and then give it a little twist like that. Try and hold it up off the bench, because you don't want to be flattening your lovely shape that you've made on the other side there. Move the cork down a bit. Okay, so that's the holes for our little lacing on the back.